release or based on MVP or a release which has multiple iteration. So let's suppose if I am selecting a agile method, one way is that am I going to use MVP, probably release 1, where we have 1, 2, 3, 4 iteration. It does not matter I have 4 or 5 iteration. Generally when we talk about agile, so Scrum says your sprint or iteration must be 2 to 4 weeks. That's it. But when you talk about XP, it says your iteration may have 1 to 4 weeks. And then they say your release time, which includes couple of iteration, maybe 30 to 180 days. And then you can say maybe I have another release, or probably release 1 and release 2, and that release 2 may have just 3 iterations, and I got another version, an upgraded version of my product. But when we see this simple iteration model, which is basically based on Scrum, it says my iteration, and every iteration will give me releasable product. And how they run their iteration is, they say if you start your iteration by doing first event, which is a sprint planning meeting. If your iteration is of 2 weeks, your sprint planning meeting will be 4 hours. And in first 2 hours of your sprint planning meeting, your product owner will present user stories and will discuss the user stories. And then in the next 2 hours, team will discuss how they are going to implement those stories. Then say, if I'm going to say it's from 1 day, 2 day, 3rd day, 4th day till 7, 8, 9, 10. So from 2nd to 9 ideally, every day my team is doing daily Scrum. Daily Scrum is scheduled for 15 minutes, same time, same location, standing event, where every team member will answer 3 questions. What we have done yesterday, what we are going to do today, and what are the impediments that we have. And in that meeting, nobody is allowed to discuss among each other, or there is no resolution discussion there. Once your meeting input is done, they will go and discuss the further nitty-gritties of the project. And then here your Scrum Master will update its burn down chart, because every meeting will help him to update its burn down chart. Then when we decide this thing and we're talking about the concept of Agile, the first thing that we need to identify who are our stakeholders. So either we are talking about the real person whom we are going to identify and get the input. The second is persona. So when we talk about persona, you can say, it's they call it avatar. What is avatar of my stakeholder? So avatar means his age, his qualification, his location, his habits, his way of doing things, so that we can understand what are his specific needs towards the project. Maybe we can write as a proxy user the requirements of our stakeholder. And then the important thing is extreme users. Extreme users are those who may want to detect or defect your product, who may want to use negatively. So this is one of the key aspects when we talk about the stakeholder. But at the same time, it's not necessary that all of our stakeholders are human. Maybe we have some systems to whom we need to interact and give some connection and integration within the product. So once we have identified our stakeholders, the next task is to identify the user stories of our system. User stories are value delivery of our product. We can use user stories, we can use use case, we can use feature list to define the scope of our product. When we talk about the user story, we say user story follow 3 C's. First C is the physical card on which we write the story. The second C is the conversation, it is actually the story. One way of writing the story is like, as a banking customer, I want to check my bank balance so that I can make some decisions. So this is the way, as a user who want this so that they can do it. The third C in this scenario is confirmation. That confirmation means how we are going to check that this story is working or not. So we can write this information at the back of the story page. Then when we talk about stories, we generally have two different types of stories. One is epic and the other one is theme. Generally people say that story, epic, theme, and they are referred as WBS, but it is not WBS. Epic is a bigger story, and one epic can contain multiple stories, and then one theme can contain multiple epics. This is how we are decomposing the model. Because when we talk about a story, it is important to see either we are going to implement this story within an iteration or not. So first thing that we need to look into it in the story is, are we following the invest criteria or not? So invest criteria helps us to review this story. Then if we are going to review that it's a big story, or if it is an epic and we need to decompose it, we can decompose our story by using two methods. One is across operational boundary and the other one is across data boundary. So that's how we define or list our stories. Then comes to the next point where we have to build our release plan. So when we talk about a release plan, the first activity is to write these stories. So how many stories we have to write it. Then in the second part, we need to estimate the story. First of all, when we talk about estimation of stories, I need to see what is my estimation technique or the reference. Am I using ideal days or story points? So let's suppose if I'm going to use story points needs some reference. So reference may be one story point is equals to 4 hours duration. One story point is equivalent to the time I need to go from Dubai to Fujairah and come back. One story point may be the time I need to write a front page of my web page. So these are the same sample reference points. Then we identify the definition of done. What is our definition of done? So because when I say we have completed a story, does it mean that we have done its coding, we have done its testing, we have deployed it or documented it, or it's just documentation with coding, or it's just documentation with testing? So what is our definition of done? Because when we say it takes one story point or 4 story point, so it should be based on definition of done. Then when we talk about the release plan in this concept, we have to see that what is the velocity of my team. And to identify the velocity of my team, I see that my typical iteration length. So let's suppose if my iteration length is say 2 to 4 weeks, so I need to see in 2 weeks iteration, what is the velocity of my team? Is my team completing 20 story points per iteration or 30 story points per iteration? What is the actual velocity? So based on number of stories and the estimations which we did based on story point, we need to identify the velocity, and that will actually help us to identify how many iterations we need in one release to get our product out. So this is how we look at this thing. So when we talk about to see how we are doing the individual iteration, so we can use the board. So one of the board is, let's suppose this is my sample board. I can use multiple boards. This is an example of a Kanban board, which is an ideal right now. Here we can say we have all the stories. Here we have total stories of a product, total story of a project. Here, these are those stories which we are going to do in say iteration number 1 or maybe in iteration number 2. So these are my stories. And then I can divide my stories among my team, or I can use some, you can say flow like analyze, design, develop. So let's say I'm saying analyze, design, develop, test, deploy. So what I'm going to say is at any point of time I can see if I have these number of stories in one iteration, how many of them are in analysis, how many of them are actually completed with an analysis. Because when you use the Kanban board, it used 2 segments. One is work in progress and the other one is buffer, because my Kanban board use pull method. What is pull method? Rather than completing my work on story and pushing it to the other people, I will just submit it to my buffer, and then the other team, when they will be able to do it based on their capacity, they will pull it from here. So this will give me the snapshot of how I am working within one iteration, how many stories we are, how we are working. So there could be 5 to 7 boards that we can use. One of the example that I have displayed here. Then when I want to see how I'm progressing as a whole in terms of the release, I can use burn down chart. So we can have burn down bar chart, we can have burn down simple chart, and then we can have burn up chart. So we have 3 separate charts we can use in terms of our monitoring controlling. So let's suppose if I'm going to make an example of burn down charts, say 80 story points, 60 story points, 40 story points, and 20 story point, iteration number 1, iteration number 2, iteration number 3, and iteration number 4. So we can see how many stories we are completing, and it is also giving me both information. Lagging information, how much is covered, leading information, how much is left. So you can move on. If during the project our requirement increases and we have to do more story points, it will go up. And then we can either do it one iteration by adding more resources so that iteration numbers will remain same, but our team will increase and will do it, or maybe we can go for another iteration and we can complete it. Another way of doing or managing is utilizing the iteration release burn up chart. So what is release burn up chart is we use a constant number, and then for each iteration we try to complete it. And this also helps me to see that if during the project our scope increases or decreases, we can track and complete this thing. Finally, the another important document that we can use for monitoring the project progress in terms of productivity of a team is a velocity chart. And velocity chart actually gives me how many story points my team per iteration is completing. So by looking at this chart, I can say for 10, 15, 20, 25. So in first iteration, my team was able to do 20. Maybe in second iteration, we were able to do some 18. Then we were able to do 25. And then we were not able to do much. And then we move on. So basically this helps me to see, here I'm seeing the progress of my overall project, and here I'm seeing the progress of my team, how they are working. And the last thing, when we talk about the concept of iteration is, first we do a sprint planning meeting. Second, every day we perform sprint daily scrum meeting, and then after the completion of the last day of I do a sprint review meeting. That sprint review meeting is, you can say, is a UAT, where my users review my final product or the output of this iteration and gives me yes or no. And then finally, after this meeting, I do a sprint retrospective. A sprint retrospective gives me the time to see how I was working in one iteration. So maybe I might suppose, or our team is supposed to use same analyze, design, develop, test method, or maybe want to do it in a different way, or maybe we can say rather than following it, we just use the name of people. So let's say for Farrokh, Nasser, Ashish, how they are working in. So maybe we can use it instead of process phases, we may use people who can do it. So this is the way we can implement Agile in our projects. Thank you.